Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We'll begin the program with tilawat recitation of the Holy Quran. So I request Ashraf Bhai, Brother Ashraf, to please recite a portion of the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum to our participants. Today we're going to have a conversation on, what it is to try and be an ideal husband. The ideal gentleman, and then specifically ideal husband. So all of us who are here to talk about it have been married for several years, 5, 6, 7, and then I think Vikas by many more years than that. So we have a few years of experience under our belt. Definitely we're not experts on the subject. We have a lot of years of marriage, of more experience to gain, but that's something we wanted to explore and we wanted to talk about. So first I'll introduce our panelists. We have Ashraf Bhai, Ashraf Hissam, who just did the tilawat. He's coming from Chicago. He's joining us from Chicago. Then we have Saud Iqbal Sahib, who's joining us from Virginia. And then we have Vikas Malik Saab, who is joining us from Seattle. And then my name is Rizwan Khan. So the theme that we're going to focus on today is expectations versus reality when it comes to marriage. And that means that for us who, us guys who are, talking about it and thinking about it, it means digging kind of deep within ourselves and trying to remember what our expectations were based on what the reality we have right now. So for me, myself, I have to really take myself out of my present shoes and go back to that 20s Rizwan and think about what was he thinking before he got married. Because the thing with life is that even when we were in school, we were stressing so much about it. After you graduate, you don't think about that mindset afterwards. So when I go back into my own mindset and I think about what expectations that I had before getting married, what I thought it would take to be a good husband, one aspect that I remember about myself is this idea that maybe I can figure it all out from books, from scientists, from self-help books, or from marriage counselors and things like that. That if I just conform to these certain behaviors, then I can be a good husband. I can have a successful marriage. So that's definitely one expectation that I remember about myself. And I think to an extent, when I look over the years at the reality of marriage, the reality of Alhamdulillah, a happy marriage, I definitely think that does contribute to a degree. It's something that can't be discounted. Having knowledge and information is great. But personally, what I found is that just basic emotional intelligence that I've had to learn, basic common sense, basic sympathy and empathy that, I've always had, but I didn't really develop fully until I got married. That I found to be the reality that I didn't really anticipate as a naive bachelor. So that's, that's just a thought that came to mind. That's something that comes to my mind when it comes to, expectations versus reality in a happy marriage. There's a lot of others expectations and realities that there could be, but for me, in my mind, that aspect of expectations is something that comes to my mind. What do you guys think?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that when it comes to the expectations and reality for me, I think at the time I couldn't have known. I think that when you're younger up until that point, I got married when I was 20, so I was pretty young then, and I wouldn't say I'm like very emotionally mature or anything at that point, but I think that up until that point, you're really growing up thinking about your wants and your needs, and that's really the focus. Um, and it's not really until marriage, like sure, your parents, you have to respect them and stuff, but you're not really thinking like, oh, what are my parents' wants and needs? Are my parents feeling, loved? It's not in that same way that when you have a wife that, okay, I have to actually think about my wife. And I think that's the first time. Obviously you think about others, you're selfless, but it's the first time you really have to care about how another person's day is going, how another person is feeling, are their needs met. You don't really have to think about that in that way before marriage. So I think that's why it's a really new paradigm.
Yeah, so kids are kind of inherently selfish. And we have to learn as we grow up to actually be selfless. Because especially, when our parents are taking care of us, they're taking care of our every need, then we never really think, there is a transition there. Because little kids, they are selfish. An infant doesn't care how sick his or her mother is. They're just, they need their food, they need to be taken care of. So yeah, I guess it does take a while to learn that selflessness and to then learn. I guess empathy is kind of a learned thing as we grow older, isn't it?
Right. Especially there's degrees to it. And I think obviously you have some degree of selflessness. You have some degree of thinking of your friends. In order to have friends, you can't just be this selfish jerk all the time. But I
Hmm.
think it's a matter of degree. It really goes to a much higher degree when you have a wife who you now have to care for, and it becomes part of that self. Your circle expands.
Hmm.
Yeah, when I think about my marriage as well, like even 8 years ago, my expectations weren't that high. I instead of having a list of expectations that this is what I'm expecting from my future spouse, I humbled myself. Basically, kind of came in it with an open mind and an open heart, and kind of just enable myself to grow and learn from each other. I mean, I think that's what made it easier for me, is because I didn't have a stack of expectations that I'm expecting from this person to do. Because if you think about it, just like Afshar Spice has said, that a woman, like if you don't have an experience like that before, like you have to realize that a woman is leaving her whole life behind, her family, her parents, her friends, everything that she's kind of grown up with, uprooting that and coming to your house. So that's a very humbling experience. And then on top of that, have expectations and seeing if those are being fulfilled, I think is an unfair comparison. So I think to kind of lower those expectations, you should kind of humble yourself and kind of make yourself at a degree where you're there to learn and grow, rather than to kind of just check
So
off things
having
that you
having no
wanted to have.
expectations came naturally to you, or was it something that just, you had to make an effort to have no expectations?
I mean, I wouldn't say I didn't have any expectations. I did have expectations. Like I had a few expectations. I wanted, a spouse that, was, close to God, close to Khilafat, and, kind of respected the faith and respected our families. So those are one of the few things that I did expect, and I kind of
I guess
was
I'm
looking
wondering
for.
like what a young Saud saw as the as himself as a husband, because I remember you, like, when you were young, and like I wouldn't, is there's some people, when you're young, you just never imagine that this person is going to be an adult, let alone somebody's husband. But then, like, in your own mind, you do think that, okay, when I'm going to be an adult, when I'm going to have, a wife, then what kind of a husband am I going to be? I mean, when I'm wondering about, expectations about ourselves as trying to be a good ideal husband, like, how do we picture ourselves? I don't know. I mean, I couldn't have never pictured you as even a husband in the first place. But I mean, how did you picture yourself? That's what I'm curious about.
Oh man, that's a good question. How did I picture myself 8 years ago, when I'm about to get married? So I mean, that's why I said, like, I really didn't think about it too much. I had full faith, so I really didn't have a mindset going in that this is the type of husband I'm going to be. It kind of just grew naturally. Like I came in with an open mind, like I said, and I was willing to learn. So basically, I didn't really have a set picture in my mind that how. I mean, I don't know, Ashraf or Vikas, but how you guys feel about it, but for me, it was kind of go with the flow type, and and every step of the way is with prayers and humility. So, what do you guys think?
I mean,
Yeah.
personally, um, I graduated college in 21, and I was blessed to have a good job right after college. And I was a pretty hard worker, and I was getting, promoted and getting awards at work, and alhamdulillah, getting really successful worldly wise. So in my mind, I thought myself was like some hotshot, who has this, proverbial um, um, rose in his pocket, and whoever's going to get is going to be the luckiest person in the world. And that was, in some sense, a very selfish and a very weak approach to getting married. So when I was thinking about my expectations, I came to the realization that I really should be thinking of what the other person's expectations are going to be as well. So if it's just my expectations, then it's very selfish, and not keeping count of what my spouse's expectation would be of from me would be a very imbalanced relationship. So when I realized that through prayer, I was actually shown real, guidance in the sense that my mindset is wrong. That you're picking one person out of you know, in your mind, the whole world at your feet. But that approach is actually very wrong. I had to find somebody who's going to be a good partner for me in my life,
Yeah.
regardless of whether other options exist or don't exist.
Yeah. I'm
And
curious as to
that helped.
I'm curious as to like that early 20s Vikas bhai, when you thought, okay, what is my prospective wife going to think of what her ideal partner is? When you kind of did that realization that, okay, I'm thinking about what the ideal partner is for me, but what would the prospective wife be thinking is an ideal partner for her? So what did that person look like for, an early 20s bachelor Vikas bhai, based on, what you thought, your expectations of what are an ideal husband, what are a good husband?
Yeah, and it goes to the point what Saud made. Like when you start thinking from the perspective of the other person, you start to realize like what marriage is really about. It's not about one person getting the perfect match, but it's about two people coming together in harmony and in love and understanding. And so once you understand that, then you are more, like you said, more emotionally aware. And then you go into a relationship with this dedication that, it's not just me in this relationship, it's only half of the relationship is me and the other half is my spouse. So therefore, I should keep in my mind when I'm thinking about, the proposals, that what would the other person think and what was the mindset that they have. So that helped me, bring me back to earth and kind of understand the dynamics of a marriage. Because if you go into a relationship like that with this selfish intention, it's very hard to carry on living a very selfish way of life.
Yeah. I think that's
Yes.
interesting you say that because I had almost the polar opposite beginning to marriage. I definitely wasn't some hotshot who, even thought himself as a hotshot. I was I hadn't graduated yet. I was actually, as I got married, still unemployed for about a year and some months after that because of having to go through immigration procedures and stuff like that. So in those first few years, I felt like, okay, well, or first year, so I had to make sure I was a good husband because I wasn't offering much else in a worldly sense because I was still going through school, going through that immigration process. And I think being young also helped that, I can't just be that lazy college student who's playing video games all day and browsing Reddit. I had to really challenge myself, grow, think a lot more about my wife. And I think being young helped me. I wasn't really set in my ways yet. 20, and I really had to that. So the dynamic of my marriage has shifted a lot. Obviously now I'm well along into my career and all that, but I feel like those early years were different for me. So maybe that the reality was different as well. So you
And I
can,
really liked what Gaspai said about, being to fulfill the expectations of your spouse. We don't, as guys, we don't really think about that. And that's a good point that he brought up is that, we're always looking at our expectations of what we want in a spouse, but we have to think about, are we fulfilling the expectations of the girl? Like, and if you think about it that way, then, I mean, it kind of shifts the paradigm in how you think about it to make yourself a better person and make sure that you're comfortable taking care of this person, and are you fulfilling what her expectations are, so that it keeps you on your guard and makes yourself a good person as well. So
Yeah,
that was a good
that
point.
point on being kind of in like a bit of a, I don't know, maybe you can say like a kind of vulnerable position kind
Mhm.
of compels you to be a better husband or at least be more cognizant of it. I hadn't thought about that before. That like, when you know that your wife's maybe like, I guess in that situation, like your immigration process and stuff like that. I don't know, maybe you had in the back of your mind that, okay, if I'm a bad husband, I'm gonna get deported or something like that. But I mean, I would just imagine that like, yeah, I guess like those people who are not in that kind of situation, like for when I think about myself, then, there, I guess the threat, there has to be some kind of fear as well. If you just are completely selfish and just, don't care, there has to be some consequences. And when I think about it, the main consequences are that, in what makes a marriage unique from other relationships is that if one person isn't happy, then both aren't happy. You can't be happy when your spouse is unhappy unless like either you're a sociopath or you just like completely disconnected from them, you just don't care anymore. But like, yeah, that definitely is also a pressure that like when a person invests into that relationship, then their spouse has to be happy for them to be happy, and that's also another pressure that I think it has to exist there. On the point of expectations though, I definitely like, what Saud you were saying earlier, like about not having expectations or low expectations, that is definitely something I can't relate to though, because like I definitely had certain expectations about myself that like, this is the kind of person, this is the kind of husband I'm going to be. And I think that's informed a lot from entertainment as well. Like I don't really watch that many movies anymore. I don't know if I watched that many movies when I was young, but like one thing I noticed is that even in the most male oriented movie, like action sequences, everything, they always write in a love interest for the man. And I don't think it's just for the women who are coming to watch the movie. I think it's because there's a part of us where we also see that as an important and necessary thing. Like even the most male oriented movies, it's not just about things blowing up and everything. It's about finding an attachment. Although they present it really poorly that, a woman or, the spouse or whatever, it's just such a trophy. It's an award that you get for completing the mission. But I feel like there's a lot of reasons for that, but definitely entertainment does influence it. And I mean, I did kind of have that kind of expectation and sort of, you can say, a daydream that, of a happy marriage, of myself as a ideal husband, and a certain expectation that was informed by, I guess, media, by
Yeah.
maybe
So
movies,
Morbius,
maybe
I was
TV.
dreaming about falling in love in an action movie.
I mean, I don't even
And
need an
that
action movie to have that daydream. I don't even like action movies that much. I prefer
I
the
can
love
imagine
stories right
Morbius
off the
having
bat.
an action movie and finding a love interest in it.
Yeah.
Just imagine that.
But I think you're right though. I mean, the reason it is in action movies, the reason it is everywhere is because it kind of also comes natural. Maybe when you're younger, you don't care about it as much, but that desire for companionship, especially as you go on to college, and maybe a lot of people around you are in relationships, and you kind of start looking, well, is there something in my life that's missing? And I think as you grow older, that urge for companionship does definitely start getting stronger and stronger, and then that's where well, what kind of companionships are around me? That's when you look at media. That's when you look at parents or what relationship they had. I think that definitely shapes your expectations there.
And I think that's a big issue now is the movies that are being shown these days. Like especially Hollywood or even Bollywood, where they kind of emphasize these big grandeur like love stories, and then they put it in these people's hearts that like this is what an ideal life is, that you go out and you find a girl and you fall in love, you dance around some trees, and then you live happily ever after. And that's kind of like the furthest from the truth. It's not something that is laced in reality. And if you look at the Islamic way of doing things, it's so much more balanced and so kind of rooted in kind of a longer lasting love, because you're not doing the superficial stuff like you were talking about before, where you're just kind of going at face value, but you're growing together and you're kind of molding each other, and that type of love is a much stronger type of love. And I think that type of love that comes after marriage is a much more real and kind of lasting type of love than what they
Yeah.
portray in Hollywood.
Now that I'm thinking
and
about it, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Vikas, please.
no, I was just gonna say that sometimes when we um, say that the love and the affection that we see in movies is not right, and that is true. This is basically all fiction. 2 hours of they could create the perfect picture over 2 hours, but spending an entire lifetime like that is next to impossible. But the reality is that we are not saying that in a healthy marriage there is no love, there is no attraction, there is just like pragmatism, and these are your roles and these are my roles, and you do yours and mine, and we'll get along fine. But there is this kindness and there is this affection that exists, that even if we look at the life of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, that he had with his wives. So I think that's a critical component in life as well, in a marriage, in a happy marriage, is to have that kindred, sort of this affection amongst the spouses,
Yeah,
but
there is
not
a lot.
to the level of what Hollywood or Bollywood
Yeah,
portrays.
surprisingly, there is a lot of stuff, like little things in a hadith about the way that the Holy Prophet ﷺ showed love to his wives, the way he showed affection, and how much of an informal relationship they had at home. And when I'm thinking about it, that entertainment question, I actually can't remember. I don't think even entertainment like movies are able to give a really good picture of what a happy marriage is. Because now I was thinking about like some of the movies that we watch as kids, or I watched in the 90s, those Disney movies. And Hollywood is all, and I guess Bollywood too. But yeah, Bollywood definitely is all about the euphoria of falling in love. And they're really good at writing that story. But I haven't seen too many writers who are able to write love, not infatuation. Anybody can write infatuation, but to actually write love. Because every time I see a sequel to a love story, it's always a disaster. Like you take, Aladdin. The sequel to Aladdin is just all domestic problems. And I don't get who goes to the movies to watch people have domestic problems. I get, okay, I don't like watching horror movies. I don't want to go and just be scared out of my mind, but some people get a rush out of it. What are you getting out of watching Aladdin fight with his wife? And also Shrek too. You know, the second Shrek, it was just them fighting with each other. Who goes to the movies to watch two people like just have domestic issues? So I don't even know if like, I can't think of like a movie or a show or something that actually really does a good job of depicting love as opposed to infatuation. So I
Yeah.
mean, I don't even know where those
And I,
expectations
and
are
I think
coming
not
from.
just movies aside, not only just in movies, I think in our lives, I mean, I'm not Pakistani or Desi, I'm Moroccan. I know it's a problem in our culture. I've heard it being an issue in Desi culture as well, that in a lot of, when you grow up with your parents or your families, there's almost this taboo on affection somewhat, that it's very likely you'll see your parents arguing, maybe even like loud noises and throwing stuff, but you'll not really see that day-to-day affection as much. I think we have a problem showing affection or like having examples of good examples of affection, but the other side, the domestic problems and stuff, it's a lot easier to know.
I've noticed that with that affection part, it's just like it's I feel like it's kind of like how you start off the relationship. Because before I got married, if you had told me to tell like my sister that I love her or my mom that I love her, just to say those words, I would, if you told me to choose between like getting punched in the face and saying those words, look my sister in the eyes and say those words, it'd be so awkward that I think I'd rather just get punched. Because the emotional anguish of just, it's so simple though. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing, but it's just when you've never done it for 20 years, to say that to your father, to say that to your sister or to someone, it's a huge barrier. But I found that in my marriage, since we started off, verbalizing love and telling each other that we loved each other, so it was no obstacle whatsoever. So I find that kind of interesting that like on one place in some relationships, it's like almost physically impossible to get those words out while looking that person in the eyes, and on the other relationship, it's like pretty easy. It's like something that comes naturally. So maybe it's a part of like forming habits, or maybe it's just how
Yes,
we form
that's true.
habits in
Like
each relationship.
that's exactly the same with me as well. Is like, like I didn't grow up with any sisters or any like female like relatives nearby. So it was more of what I saw my parents do. Like if you see like your parents are loving and they're affectionate, and then that kind of shows what works and what doesn't. You see that there's love between them. So that's something that you can emulate when you get married, and you do it with your spouse as well. So that's something that kind of helped me show affection to my wife as well, is that that when my parents are talking sweetly to each other, and you know what how to talk sweetly, and I mean, and then the I love yous come kind of later, but like in the beginning where the awkwardness is there, that kind of you kind of draw on what you saw, so that when whatever you see, you can apply it, the good parts of it, that is and kind of start off there and then kind of grow until you're more comfortable and showing more and more affection.
Yes, so it has a lot to do with how we start off.
Hmm.
And also, I think communication, generally speaking, are one of the key um, elements to a successful marriage, is being able to communicate openly and freely, and not just verbalizing something, but also showing it with action. Speaks volumes, because even the children, they pick up on like the slightest clues. You don't really need to be being very loud. They pick up small clues even, and you don't have to be like overly expressive. They know when you're laughing with your spouse. They notice those things, and that then translates into a happier marriage, for them, what the happier marriage should look like. So I think as parents,
That
especially
reminds me of a
those who have,
story that
go ahead. Yeah.
oh, sorry. I was just saying. That just reminds me of a story that Abid Khan Sahib was sharing about his wife. He was very reserved. He never talked. He never said any affectionate things to his wife, and Hazur picked up on it, and he was saying that, have you ever said "I love you" to your wife? And he's like, no, I haven't said that. So, right then and there, he made Abid Sahib, text his wife, "I love you," and his wife responded immediately. Did Hazur tell you to say this? And then he said, yeah. So I mean, so even Hazur, he's kind of expressing this point that you should say "I love you." You should say, that you love your spouse, and that's a good way of kind of keeping.
Yeah, it's found in hadiths as well. There was one, it was not just between husband and wife, but even one time the Holy Prophet ﷺ told somebody to tell someone, he said, if you love him, have you told that person that you love him? So that's something that I think, yeah, we as men, and especially Muslim, and it's a religious obligation to overcome that barrier and be able to express emotions in certain situations, to keep that kind of packed up based on just some cultural baggage that goes against Islam, that's something that actually it's our religious responsibility, I suppose, to overcome.
Yeah. And I think all the things we've been discussing, I think they bring up this other idea. We're talking about like the ideal gentleman. I think when you look at the society we're living in now, there's a lot of talk of like, oh, you know, masculinity is under attack. There's this whole men's rights movement, incel movement, all this stuff. I think what we're hearing from the ahadith, what we're hearing from these examples is that it's kind of out of the guy taking, not looking, oh, I'm do this or do that, or if there's a problem in the household, you know, we got to fix whatever the woman's doing, or it starts with that personal responsibility and saying, how can I improve myself? What can I do? Like you said in the example of you go and text your wife. It's not like that, oh, we don't do it with each other. You started off. I think that aspect of you taking responsibility and you trying to fix if there's a problem or take that first step, I think we have to talk about that more, that it's not just always coming in the middle. Maybe sometimes you have to take that first step.
I don't know too much about that movement. I don't know, maybe I just
That's
haven't
true.
read into it too much, but it's kind of like a counter movement, I guess, to like, you know, feminism that might have gone too far, where it comes from an insecurity that I have to control. I have to make sure that I'm not controlled by my wife or my girlfriend or something like that. I guess it's basically born out of a basic insecurity of something people have maybe observed in their own parents' relationship or maybe elsewhere. I guess that's where it must
No, I
come
think
from.
it's also because, you know, kids, I think guys nowadays, you know, there's a big term going around saying that you're whipped. You know, if you show any affection, or if you show if you show like any sort of preference to your wife over your friends are gonna be, oh man, you're whipped, man. You just want to, you know, spend, you know, you're just locked up in your house. You know, you're with your wife all day. You're not gonna hang out with the guys. So I mean that type of mentality kind of makes people want to kind of be more masculine and be like, oh no, man, you know, I'm with the guys. I don't have to, you know, my wife can do whatever she wants, but I'm with you guys. So I mean, I think that's where it kind of stems from, is you know, that the kind of that toxic masculinity that Shabai was talking about, that kind of drives people to be more reserved and not show that affection, which I don't agree with, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I don't remember that playing much of a role, like when in the expectations that I form before marriage or being an ideal husband, you know, like what are friends going to think? I guess it depends on each different personality. You know, like some people, they're much more social and they have like a large circle of people, and, you know, their relationships with like a large group of people matters a lot. I mean, for me, since personally, I just don't need to have like a lot of friends or a large group of people. So the way I kind of envisioned it was that, like, you know, if I can just find a good friend in my wife, then I don't really need friends anymore after that, right? I mean, because I have one friend. Who needs more than one friend? I don't need two friends. So I mean, that's the way I kind of looked at it. But I mean, I know everybody's not like that. I mean, I think that's kind of coming out in
Don't worry, marriage is
coronavirus
for
as
your
well.
friend.
Huh? Yeah,
I'm your friend,
because
Marriage.
there's probably people who have happy marriages who are still feeling cabin fever during coronavirus, because for some people one friend is all the friends you need, and for other people you need to have like three, four, or five friends. But for me, like when I think back, my expectations, like, because I've always felt a little bit uncomfortable in, like, you know, social situations, large groups and things like that. So my expectation for me as a husband, you know, going forward into marriage when I was a bachelor, was just that if I can be a good husband and we can have a good marriage, then like that's all you need. Then you're just kind of set for life, and you don't really need to worry about this socializing anymore after that.
Yeah. That's funny you say that. I definitely think in general there's going to be this pre-lockdown version of marriage, and then the post-lockdown, everyone in a pandemic stuck at home with their wives all day. It's definitely another flavor to the marriage. I think it's interesting, especially if you're working from home. You're there all day, you're seeing each other all day, but maybe you don't even get time to talk to each other. It's definitely a lot of new dynamics.
Yeah, and if anything, I've noticed like one positive thing that the pandemic has created for me, at least, is that I've gotten a new appreciation for all the work that is done by my spouse. And before it was sort of you know, I go to work and I come back and magically all the things are right. But now I can see like what goes into you know, running a house, and that, and if you as a man don't appreciate those things, I think that also creates some problems. So as men, I think if anything, firstly, we should be helping out. But if anything, we should be appreciating all the work that goes into running a household.
Yeah.
One thing that I was kind of interested in asking about is, you know, that transition. Again, like I'm just interested to know like how other guys feel about this, the transition from infatuation to love. Like that happens in like it happens for everybody in their marriage, people who don't get married with their girlfriends or whatever it is, there has to be a transition from infatuation to love. And some people don't make it there. Some people just have infatuation and they go from there to hate. They realize that, okay, I don't even love this person. It was just like a rush. It was just emotions. And for arranged marriages, it's kind of an interesting dynamic because you don't really date, you don't really fall, even people who date, you can't fall in love in like a year of dating or something like that. I mean, that's still the stage of infatuation. Even scientifically, I think the way the chemicals work in the brain during infatuation is different from the calming effect that love has. But there was this kind of interesting thing that I realized about myself when I had kids, because people have this idea that once you have a kid, then you're going to just your heart is going to change. You're going to immediately fall in love with this baby. You're going to want to die for, you're going to have this euphoric rush of an attachment with the baby. And that doesn't happen for everybody. It happens for a lot of people. It doesn't happen for everybody. I think it happens for almost all mothers, but it doesn't happen for all fathers. And personally, that's how I felt about all of my kids. When they were born, it was a good baby, a nice baby, no problem, not a bad baby at all. But like, I didn't feel that euphoric,
Not a bad
love.
baby at all.
Yeah. I had no objections to the baby whatsoever. I mean, it was a cool baby.
This is getting recorded.
Yeah, but it took
Okay,
months.
he's an
It
okay
took
baby.
months for that love, that love to develop. And then when I actually had that experience, I realized that that's how I felt in the beginning of my marriage as well, that there was infatuation. But then there was a phase there where I was asking myself that, am I in love? And I was kind of afraid of the answer because it takes time and the heart doesn't lie. So like there was a phase where I was a little bit worried, and then I don't remember but there was a point where I wasn't afraid of that question anymore. And then I knew that, yeah, this is what I was looking for. This is, my heart is now completely on board. And that has to take years. Nobody can be in a relationship for 6 months and claim that they're in love. It doesn't work. So I mean, that's something that was definitely something that when I think back to the beginning of my marriage, it was something that was always in the back of my mind, that I am infatuated, but am I in love? And will I ever fall in love? What's going to happen? So that's something that like I find intriguing about my own experience. And I'm always interested to hear like what.
Like I think when from my situation, like when I was getting married, like I knew my wife had a good heart, like she was very loving, she was very pure in her heart in that sense. So like for me, like when we first got married, I was really attracted to that. That was very, you know very humbling to see that this person has a very pure heart, and and what she does is out of pure love. So that kind of molded me to kind of increase my love for her every single time. Like you said, in the beginning, you're just infatuated and you're kind of in that mental space. But once you start living together and you see this person's heart, you see how this person reacts to things, you see how this person is caring, and how this person kind of helps you in every part of your life, that naturally increases that love for your love for that person. So for me, that's how it was. It was like just seeing her, and how she reacts and how she lives her life, and that heart was something that I got attracted to, and that was when I knew that I loved my wife. So, I mean, that was for me. So, to answer your question, is just to see that person's heart and how they kind of go about things, and love just comes from there.
Yeah, and I think infatuation there's nothing special about infatuation. Infatuation will always happen. Infatuation is really just the novelty factor. You can be infatuated with an inanimate object. You could like have a new car and be infatuated. Oh my God, it goes 0 to 40. I'm gonna put some nice rims on it. Like there's guys who are really infatuated with a bunch of stuff. So I think that's just a novelty factor, something that's new. You get that rush of dopamine. But love, like you were saying, is it's after, okay, now the novelty's worn off. Now it's just, wake up, same thing, go to sleep, wake up, go to sleep. Now what's left? And I think that's where you have to bond over something that's more long-term, find something that you appreciate more so than anything that's just novelty.
And I think love is not constant. Infatuation is sort of like, it comes and goes, but love evolves. And I think, you made a point as well, is that you have kids, their situations change. And all that contributes into the overall love that you have in your family. And it creates a more rich environment. So I think love is encompasses not just the mainstream entertainment definition of love, of butterflies and jumping in rose gardens and things like that, but it's like a very high level of commitment and understanding that creates this affection between individuals of a household. And I think children contribute to the love of that exists between the spouse and yourself. And I've certainly felt that with children, our relationship only solidified more, and we had more appreciation for each other, and we had more love amongst each other.
You talk
So
about, yeah, you talk about love kind of, changing over time. And, that kind of really plays a lot into expectations about love, because the question is, what is love in the first place? Like, how do you define it? And of course, you can pull up a dictionary definition, but then what are the feelings that a person has by which they know that this is something that is distinct? Because I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'd have a hard time remembering, like, before I got married, if I were to be asked, how do you define love and how do you make it distinct from infatuation? But I mean, that's now after the fact. I mean, it's a question that I found intriguing, that it took some time for me to even try and figure out what are the symptoms of love, what are the signs of love, what is the feeling that it has, and how can it be defined. So I mean, that's something that I guess through experiencing the reality of a happy marriage, a person has to start to develop a clear, somewhat of a clear answer on, right? I mean, I could expect a bachelor to be kind of confused on it and be thrown off on it, but like, as having some experience under our belts, I mean, there has to be somewhat of a clear definition of love, and um, the symptoms and the expressions, the signs of love
yeah,
that
and I
exist in
think
a
sometimes
relationship.
we settle for somebody else's definition, and that's what creates a lot of headache and problems for people, because they go with the definition that has been provided to them through the environment that's around them, and if that's the perfect Facebook pictures or the Instagram pictures for like 1 second that was choreographed perfectly, and then you say, oh, this person is so much in love and they have the perfect family and they have the perfect life. So they take this definition and then they apply it to their own lives, and then they feel miserable, and it creates a lot of problems for them. So I think, like you said, love is something that is only can be expressed by the person who is in love, and it is much more than the perfect picture and then the perfect house or the perfect car. And it has many more aspects than just the obvious things that people state as love.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think Mabisab was saying is kind of like a textbook, kind of definition of love. Like, how do you know you're in love? Like, I agree with Guasbai, because, you can't really pinpoint a second or a moment that you say, oh yeah, now I'm in love. It's more of a feeling that you just know, now you know that, this feels right. This feels good. And I can imagine myself doing this for the rest of my life. So, I mean, I don't think there's a moment or a type of instance where you can say, boom, this is now I'm in love. Before it was infatuation, but now from this day forward, I'm in love. I don't think it's like that. I think it's like a gradual feeling and a peace of mind and a calmness in your heart that kind of solidifies the fact that, yes, this is love, and this is how it's going to be.
Yeah, and I think you can even have different forms. Like you have a certain love for your parents. You have certain love for your siblings, love for your wife, love for I just had a son. I have a different love for my son. I think they're all different forms of love, but I think the one with the wife is a bit different because that's the only one that you don't really have like a blood relation with. It's not the same way that you feel about a son or a parent. I think that's the one that you have to build through kind of like what you make of the relationship rather than a relationship that's already forced on you. That's a bad
Yeah,
word.
and I think that's a very good term that you used, that you have to build, because sometimes people think that it's something that magically happens. There's this spark that flies, and all of a sudden, this is gonna happen. But even Allah Ta'ala says that I create love amongst people's hearts. So it's something that is built over time and it morphs over time, and it changes and becomes more rich. So I think that's something that we have to kind of keep in the mind as well, is to how do you create love amongst people, is being, by being kind to them, by being gracious to them, by all those qualities that we told about. So if we don't have those things, and then we have the expectation that, oh, I have no love in my life, then perhaps we're missing the big picture, that we're not actually creating any love in our life.
Yeah.
And it's not, the other person's fault.
Yeah. One thing we talked about a little bit earlier was, we would imagine is the expectation of an ideal husband from the other side. So, I'm trying to think back also to what I had in my mind at that time, that what does it take to be a good husband? Because, just trying to think of what I thought at that time, it would probably be something related to just being a good friend. um, if I can be a good friend with somebody who I'm friends with, then maybe it's just that in a different form when it comes to a marriage. It means just being able to enjoy the same jokes. It means being able to talk about the same conversations, things like that. So I guess maybe like I kind of imagined that I could be the best husband to someone who is most like me, just like a projection of myself, which is a very narcissistic thing to think. But that's an expectation that I thought that, okay, like someone who's just basically like me, that's someone who I could get along best with. I didn't realize how much self loathing is involved, that if I actually got married to somebody who's exactly like me, I would hate them more than anybody in the world. But one thing that has changed from expectations to reality is that I've realized that even when it comes to friends, being with somebody who's a lot like you, as in has the same, qualities and then the same personality flaws, it kind of brings out the qualities and the flaws as well. Like I find that when I hang out with a friend who has the same personality flaws as that I have, once I'm done with the conversation, when I'm done hanging out, I don't really feel better about myself. I'm like, yeah, we kind of, just talked about stuff and interacted in a way that brought out those flaws more. So one thing that I found is, with some experience and the difference between expectations versus reality is that being with somebody who is kind of well-rounded in comparison to your own personality, who contrasts well with you, that really helps in being a better person, and that leads to like better happiness, like real happiness. But I mean, that's just the expectations that I had. The expectations were so naive, and I'm like surprised at the huge contrast that there is. I was so sure that this expectation is correct, that like, of course I will be happy with somebody who's like me, personalities match, everything matches. But then after years to realize that that'll actually be negative in a lot of ways that I never even anticipated before. And that perfect wife, if I'd actually ended up, or if I was imagining somebody, even when I think back to when I was a bachelor, if I was imagining that, okay, maybe I should get married to this person, now I can think that, yeah, I think that would have been a disaster. That wouldn't have been right, because expectations were just so far off from reality. I mean, it's surprising how far off expectations can be from reality sometimes.
Yeah. I think that for me, what really makes that ideal husband, if I had to put it down to one word that like, encompasses everything, even in the Quran, up in Surah Baqarah, one of the first major sins mentioned is like that arrogance. And not arrogance in the sense that you're bragging about what you have, or it's really that sense of your own ego, that you need to come first, that it's really all about your needs and your wants. I think that's the key thing that has to change when you get married, because if really all you care about is your needs and your wants, then you're not really looking for a wife, or you're not looking to be a husband. You just want a live-in maid, and if you have kids, a living maid who's also a nanny. Like,
So is
and
that
that's
something you knew like before marriage? I mean, it's a common sense point, but
yeah, no, that's true. It's not something I knew before marriage. It's maybe that is kind of what I thought marriage would be. But once you see that, hey, you know what, this is not just someone who's going to be a maid and a nanny. It's I have to go away from just thinking about me, and now start thinking, like someone said earlier, as simple as just appreciation. That's huge. Like if someone does something and then you appreciate it, that already goes from that level of maid or nanny just to something like that genuine appreciation, that you did this, that you have your own needs and wants, and yet you did this for us or for me. I really appreciate that. That's big. But to do that, you have to like step down from that ego and that arrogance.
and you said you didn't really do that before, right? You didn't do it much in relationships with like sister and
No, I
husband.
mean,
and
I
whatever.
think our base selves are very arrogant, very self-centered. That's like the default state for a human, and that's something again that you build. And I think that's something in any relationship you have with another human, you have to take control of that arrogance. But I think again with your wife, because it's day in day out, it's easy to go to an ijtima and be very selfless and let someone else in front of you in line and stuff like that. But it's your daily life where that arrogance can creep in.
So I wonder if that
Yeah, I
is
agree. I think
connected. Yeah,
that's.
sorry, go ahead. So
I was just gonna say, I was gonna agree that like the best way to go about it is humbling yourself first. Instead of make yourself a ideal spouse, you have to humble yourself. Like nobody is perfect, and not you. You're not perfect. Your spouse is not perfect. And Hazura said this many times that nobody's perfect. Everybody has good traits, and everybody has bad traits. And those couples are the most successful. Are those who kind of hide the bad traits and elevate the good traits in the other person. So that requires a lot of humility, like Ashabai said, that to let go of your ego and kind of ignore the bad traits in another person. That takes a lot of willpower, and that, if you can do that, then you've done half the battle there, because you're avoiding all unnecessary arguments. You're ignoring, you're avoiding all sorts of domestic issues, just because you've humbled yourself enough to kind of overlook some bad traits in your partner, and then if there's a good trait, you elevate those really, really high. So that those type of couples, I think, are more successful, who can successfully do that. And that requires a lot of effort from both sides, the man and
I
the
want,
girl. So
I
if you
wonder what the
can if you
source,
can
I
do
wonder
that.
what the source of that is though, Like, I mean, what we're talking about is just kind of emotional intelligence, I guess. But does that mean that, like women usually have more of that emotionally attuned ability to like, think about what the other person is feeling and things like that. So, in a marriage, we develop that more because we have to, because the marriage is now about both people being happy. You can get, your sister or your brother can be mad at you and you can go about your day happy, but in a marriage it's not really going to work. So like, does it have to do, we had those skills before we got married. We weren't like just completely zero there, it was there, but it definitely is something that got enhanced out of necessity, out of the nature of that relationship.
Yeah.
So I mean, is it something that women just have already before marriage, and that we just, because of the way we interact with other guys, the way that we kind of like have an environment around us, is, I mean, is that something that women just already have? Is there like a huge shift? Do you think there's like a huge shift for women, that when they go from not being married to being married, that they learn all these new things? Because for in my experience, yeah, definitely there was a huge step, that going from not spending much time thinking about how someone else feels, expressing love, and what is an expression of love, that okay, this person, she's expressing love to me right now, this is the intention behind it, like thinking about things that weren't even there before. So I mean, if the source of it is just that emotional intelligence, that intuitiveness, and that means that for women it wouldn't be that big of a step, it would be a huge step just for men. Maybe the source is in emotional intelligence. I don't know where, if there's somewhere else that the source is.
Yeah.
But,
I'm
but
not
I
I'm not
think,
sure.
go ahead, Asher.
No, no, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that, like you said, um, although there's a big difference between marriage and your other relationship, like with your parents and with your siblings, but um, those relationships do equip you to be successful in marriage. So, for example, if somebody is not um, respectful towards their siblings or towards their parents, then to imagine that that person is going to become respectful to their spouse is sometimes a far cry. So as we were growing up, or as you're growing up, I think it's important to have mature relationships based on respect with your siblings and your parents, because they do translate in a very different way in a marriage, but there is a link that exists. So sometimes people think that, it's okay that I don't talk to my brother or my mother, but I'll be a great husband or a wife. But that's sometimes doesn't work, because those people that you're living with for like 20 years and spend so much time with, and you don't have good relationships with them, what makes you think that a stranger that you're going to marry, or for a few months, you're going to have wonderful relationship with that person? So I think we have to be realistic in our approach
So Casper,
with
were you like
marriage.
emotionally communicative before marriage, like with your siblings? I know you have a brother.
Well, I wasn't like overly communicative, but definitely had great relationships with my siblings, and
mm,
tried to be respectful of my parents and the commitment that they had bringing me up.
Yeah.
And like I said, I mean, for me too, it's a work in progress, right? As we're
Yeah.
going, those things will help in your marriage, because you've already had, some good relationship with your siblings, and that translates into the marriage as well.
Yeah, I think you bring up good points. It got me thinking, like, we say that marriage is half your faith. That's a very famous hadith we talk about all the time. Obviously, there's the societal benefit. If you have a society where everyone marries, children are obviously a large part. But I wonder if there is something about that marriage that also is, when, like we've been talking about, developing emotional intelligence, it becomes more important. Is there something that it helps you develop certain morals and certain things in your character that before that maybe you don't have to? Because it's one thing doing it in spurts, but it's that daily. If you're married, it's a daily thing. And so I wonder if that's maybe part of it as well, why it's so important to your faith, is that it's something that really allows you to build that character and those morals.
Yeah, it must be. It must be because I definitely see like, after marriage, there's like a whole aspect of a personality that develops, which is very relevant to prayer and a relationship with God Almighty, especially having kids as well. Um, but I mean, I was thinking about what Vakaspai was saying about how, like, when you're respectful and when you're good to your family members, that's a good indication that you're going to be good to your spouse, to your wife. I mean, I was just thinking, like, there's a lot of teenagers who, you go through that miserable phase of being a teenager where you're like out of sync with your own body, like all sorts of stuff are going on. It's just, you're just kind of miserable in that stage. And then, there's sometimes dysfunction at home as well. You're fighting with your parents, fighting with your siblings. So a lot of times people, I feel like they think during that phase that, okay, yeah, I have like horrible relationship with my family members right now, but when I find that perfect person, then you're going to see how great I am. I'm going to be like, emotionally in touch. I'm going to be all this. I'm going to be great. It's going to be a great relationship. And I wonder how often that actually works out because I don't know. I mean, I can definitely see myself in that position though. Like I would not want to hang out with like 16-year-old Rizwan. Like I would end up being really annoyed and maybe even hurting him because like all teenagers are always like, it's just a miserable stage. You can't really change that. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it is possible. Like maybe I'm just thinking about myself that there's a lot of that I learned after marriage. And I don't know if I had like, even when I think back, like basic emotional intelligence before marriage. And maybe I just learned a lot after marriage where it's just kind of started falling into place. Or maybe I'm just being too hard on my teenage self.
I mean,
I
and
think
then again, you got to see that you're
it's
not just seeing your own family, right? When you're married, you see the other side of the family as well. So that you learn a lot from how your wife interacts with their family, with her own family. So you kind of see what works, what doesn't work, and then you could also pick up on those cues and use that to help with your wife as well. So it's not just your own background and how you grew up. If you're open to learn and you're open to kind of change your ways, then you can draw inspiration from anywhere. I mean, you can pick up the good parts from this person, that person, not just necessarily your own parents or your siblings. So I mean, I think that willingness to change, that willingness to learn and grow, that kind of is more important than the baggage you might have growing up. Because if you might have the worst childhood in the world, but if you're seeing good people around you, you're going to emulate that and use that for your life. So I think it's not necessarily having to kind of do what you grew up with, but what you're surrounding yourself with and what you're picking inspiration from that you can use to kind of live a happier life with your spouse.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that your parents were an influence on that. So like that is something that carries a big influence on how you conduct yourself in your own marriage, that like being able to observe what you saw as like loving interactions and happy interactions at home from the parents is something that just makes it easier to emulate in your own marriage after you got married.
Yeah, definitely. Like I wouldn't say I'm 100% replica of what my parents went through, because my parents were immigrants. They had their own kind of mentality, and they had their own type of relationship. But I mean, I would pick up on the cues. Sometimes I would see what my dad. Sometimes he would say like a lighthearted or romantic type thing to my mom, and she would giggle. That would be something that I would see that, oh yeah, this is what you should do. You should have cute nicknames for each other. That works. That something that increases the love. And you know asking what the small things that my parents would do, I would pick up on those. And then those things are some things that kind of work in any type of relationship, if you want to use those. But yeah, I wouldn't say that it was 100% what my parents did, but here and
Yeah,
there, and kind of
I read
blended it
somewhere,
into
I remember
some.
reading somewhere that like you can, the effect that a bad relationship has on kids is so direct that I remember reading that like you can test for the stress hormones in the urine of a child and then determine if there's domestic problems happening at home, because if the parents are fighting, it has that much of an immediate and direct effect on the kids. So yeah, I mean, having like a happy marriage and being able to be raised, I assume it must have like a proportionally positive effect on the kids. So, being able to see your parents in love is something good.
Exactly.
And that means for
Definitely.
us, to be an ideal husband is something
Yeah.
that's really going to have a positive effect on our kids if we're able to be successful in being a good and ideal husband.
Mhm.
Right. I
That's
mean,
true. That
I heard even a more dangerous statistic that, they studied that that it's better for one partner to die than to have a stressful relationship. That the kids are able to absorb the loss of a parent better than, having fighting parents or separated parents. So if
Yeah.
anything, that's like, a red light that we should all be aware of, that having a happy family is actually, that's why we believe that marriage is the institution that creates chastity in this society. And if that breaks down, then a lot of things break down.
So I see, unfortunately, the time is 7:55, so we got to wrap up this session. But there was one point that, Ashraf, you had made earlier, and I think if we have a future discussion, we definitely got to expand on that, which is because you had kind of asked the question, but none of us kind of really answered it. We never really bounced off of it because I felt like it was such a deep question, which is that, all the stuff that we're talking about, what our expectations were before marriage, what we found the reality of marriage to be, how we matured, emotionally matured, the things that we learned. How does that actually a commentary of that hadith, which is that marriage is half of faith? Because we hear it all the time, but what does it actually mean? So, I mean, there is definitely a very strong link between marriage, wife, husband, and then children related to spirituality, related to understanding the attributes of God, related to our namaz. Because there's that saying in the Sufia as well that man arafa nafsa, whoever recognizes his own self, arafa rabbahu, he's recognized his Lord. So there's so much, and I think in this conversation we saw as well, there's so much we learn about ourselves after we get married that we didn't even know. So that arafa nafsa who can only really happen after marriage. So I think that definitely has to be explored a lot. And that goes into, I guess, like, our relationship with our wives and then our relationship with God, and how there's certain emotions that we learn within our marriage to understand, to think about, to express, and then using that same kind of experience and emotional maturity to be able to express our heart openly and uninhibitedly on the janmas when we're praying to Allah Almighty. So I think that's definitely a really important and interesting topic that I want to discuss, and I'd love to talk about in a future session. So we're coming to the end of our time, so I'll turn it over to Azam Akram Sahib, who is the Mu'tamim of Tarbiyat, to close us out on this conversation.
Jazakallah khair, everybody. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just enamored by the level of insight, the level of shu'ur or experience that all of you panelists brought to this experience. I've been capturing a lot of good feedback from our audience. And today, alhamdulillah, we had 62 people join in via Zoom and a few more on our YouTube stream. From the looks of it, it looks like people would like to have more of these conversations. And I just wanted to let all our viewers know that the ideal gentleman, as we've all learned, is something that's achievable. It's part of who we are. And as Muslims, we are guided by our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who reminded us that an ideal gentleman is one who is ideal towards his family. And I am the most ideal towards my family. That makes us the ideal gentleman. Although this program is for our boys in Majlis Khudaam al-Ahmadiyya, I know we have had other people join. And usually it's quite a matter of concern where when we hear from our sisters that, we're training our daughters to be spiritually enlightened and talking to them about these virtuous issues, yet sometimes you don't see the other side of the lens. Maybe that's what Zoom has done or this virtual setting has done. We'd like for you to join in and promote this to see what conversations we are to have, cerebral conversations, thought-provoking conversations, conversations that add value to our life and have a better experience in that matrimonial setting where the promised Messiah, والسلام, the founder of our community, has expressed in very clear and eloquent words that the wife of a thief can only be a thief. So how we emulate ourselves, the rest of our families will take lead. If we're married, we can always do better. If we're on that road to marriage, we can always make sure that we have this guidance and this expectation. We know that we're having conversations during COVID everywhere else, but we want you to know that here's a space for you and a place for you to have that open, laid back, honest dialogue with each other. If you or anybody know could be a valuable member of one of these panelists up here, and who has an experience that they can share, that provides that aspect of leading towards that ideal gentleman, please don't hesitate. I've put my number down there in the chat box, and it's 301-512-3037. Please feel free to reach out to me day or night so that we can cater our programs to meet the demands and the needs of the beautiful community of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah Ta'ala bless you all for joining us. And I know you're going to tune into the debate, but may Allah bless you all. And please pray for us. Please pray for our boys, that we may be able to guide them and lead them with the guidance of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with the guidance of Hazrat Masih Maud and his khulafa. If you have anything else that you can hang on to in these virtual times, Hazur has always been reminding us through his Friday sermons, is that let's get connected with Khilafat. May Allah Ta'ala bless all of our panelists. May Allah Ta'ala bless all of you. Jazakallah ahsan al-jazak. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah wa alaikum salam.
So the panelists can go off. What we need to do now is to capture all the comments, all the data, and if we end the meeting prematurely, we'll lose all that. So we're requesting the audience to just drop off. You can leave. We're done with the program. And so the back-end team can just recapture this data. All right.